Next up is our presenter for tonight. Our presenter is Dr. Christina Parks, and she will be presenting on coronavirus mitigation strategies, masks, flu shots, and COVID vaccines. Do they first do no harm? I'd love to introduce Dr. Parks to you. Hold on one moment. I think I might need to mute Allison. Sorry, Allison, I'm gonna mute you. All right. Dr. Christina Parks is a molecular and cellular biologist. She received her PhD in cellular and molecular biology from U of M in 1999. She did her graduate research in the field of cytokine signaling. For those of you that don't know, cytokines are the chemicals that the immune system uses to communicate. Dr. Parks brings a wealth of knowledge about molecular mechanisms by which vaccines may be causing injury to our vulnerable immune system. I'm going to introduce her a little bit more here just to get you more familiar with Dr. Parks. She has been in the spotlight recently for her outspoken resistance to the radical bias narrative being pushed by Michigan's Governor Whitmer and her executive branch. She advocates for doctors to focus on known epigenetic differences in the African American population that are causing them to be more vulnerable to COVID-19. Dr. Parks is a passionate advocate for scientific and medical freedom. She has called out the media for their misinformation about campaigning regarding hydroxychloroquine and its use to prevent and treat COVID-19, as well as their silencing of doctors and scientists who have dared to tell the truth. Dr. Parks has been closely following the science around the world on the origin of SARS-CoV-2, as well as the development of the fast-track vaccine. So we're really excited to have you tonight, Dr. Parks, to discuss this with us. I'm going to unmute you. Let's see. I will unmute you. And then what I'm also going to do, if you are ready, I'm going to make you presenter. So, oops, that's not you. So in just a moment, you will see a little icon pop up to make you presenter. I see that you are unmuted. So now at your leisure, if you want to just click that, we'll be able to see your screen. And we see it.
So can you hear me now?
We can hear you and we can see your screen.
Okay, great. Let me see. I'm trying to minimize some of these other things here.
Here.
Let's see. I don't know. Okay, let me go here. Okay, so hopefully, let's see. Okay, here we go. All right. So we're coming into fall, which is usually flu shot season, and so now I'm seeing commercials. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, we can.
We're seeing commercials on, how we need to get our flu shots, which kind of begs the question: if we're all wearing masks, how can it in the mask work? How can any of us get the flu, right? So, because the masks work, and that's why we're wearing them. But I'm seeing a lot of push for flu shots, and then, of course, probably closely on the heels, there's COVID vaccines that are in trials. And so many of us are understandably extremely apprehensive. And so, of course, we know the answer to this rhetorical question, but as our doctors are supposed to make sure that they're supposed to first do no harm. And so as we look at these, I want to look at the potential harm that they do and just sort of inform about some various information that you may or may not be familiar with. Oops. Let's see. Okay. All right. So, one of the big controversies has just been that, like, how can anyone really believe that these masks work because there's just so many inconsistencies? So I just want to be very clear. I didn't even weigh in on the mask controversy because it was just so obvious that it was just a fallacy and that there was no truth in it. And so it's common sense and almost all scientists in the field and doctors who maybe work with viruses know that the viruses are not just in the spit droplets. They're on your breath. If you breathe out through your mouth or your nose, and you are shedding virus in your respiratory system, then you're breathing out virus. So the whole blocking the spit droplets narrative is just a complete and utter lie, and most doctors and scientists know it. So the question is, why aren't they speaking up? Why are they such cowards? They want their job, and I guess they think it's going to blow over without bad things happening because they don't really believe that the vaccines cause injury. But I mean, I know some doctors are now looking into the vaccines and things like that because they're like, well, if they are lying about this, what else are they lying about? So we kind of need to take advantage of that situation. But unfortunately, you have to know someone well enough to know if they can see through this lie or if they're afraid to say anything or whatever. So, but if you think about it logically, if the spit droplet narrative were true, then they would have told us to wear scarves or whatever mask we could make, or wrap a shirt around your face back in March when our essential workers were still going to the grocery stores and that sort of thing, and they didn't. I don't remember the mask mandate starting until the end of June or something in Michigan. So it's absolutely utterly ridiculous, and it just boggles my mind that anyone believes this is about blocking virus. So again, the viruses are so tiny that they'll go through the pores in the mask, but before that, they're going to go out the sides of the mask, out the top near your eyes. And so it's kind of like when you put your thumb on a hose, the water doesn't come out less, it squirts out further because you narrowed the opening. So what does go out actually shoots further from the hose than if you hadn't put your thumb on the hose in the first place. So that's the effect of putting the mask on, where whatever breath is going to shoot out the sides by your ears or any other openings in the mask and shoot out further, thus contaminating the area. So just utter stupidity. But obviously, there's a reason, right? So the recent studies have demonstrated, I think this was just on Laura Ingram, that they cannot even collect active virus from the breath of many who test positive. So we don't know if that's because it's a false positive or because, remember, that PCR test just tests for some RNA virus. You could have had some RNA virus make it into your respiratory system, but your body mounts a good immune response and you're not shedding any virus because your body is taking care of it. So you still do have some virus there, but you don't have an active infection. So even though you test positive, that does not mean you have an active coronavirus infection. And some of the recent studies are demonstrating that they can't even collect active virus after half an hour of having the people breathe. So, however, where they were able to quantitate amounts of virus was in the sewage in Italy when they went back to try to figure out when this began. And since they can, they just routinely take samples of the sewage to test for different chemicals and different things. And when they tested, they found that the virus was in there at different times. And so it appears that this is shed in the stool. There's receptors in your intestinal system. Obviously, more work needs to be done on this. Children may not have receptors in their lungs. Maybe they have it in their stool. Maybe they're spreading it that way, but because they don't have it in their lungs, they don't get the severe respiratory presentation. So they may be shedding it in their stool, spreading it to one another. They have a mild form, and it may be transmitted oral fecal, but maybe that's not a big deal. Of course, unless maybe they spread it to someone who is very vulnerable. So our health agencies have to know this information. They completely ignore it. I mean, no one's even talking about wiping down the bathroom doors, let alone putting UV lights in the bathrooms. So the most probable reason for mask mandates is to keep up the illusion of a pandemic, because otherwise it would look an awful lot like normal life. So many people are worried about their children doing sports right now in Michigan, and I would be too. I'm very thankful that my son has already graduated because we know this means a lot to many teenagers, and taking it away is very damaging to them psychologically. We know some people died in China from exercising and wearing a mask, and so because I study things at the molecular level, it's very obvious to me that this is just a metabolic nightmare. Your body has feedback systems, and so short-term mask wearing can reduce energy production. So it actually, they know that it has a therapeutic effect for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And they've used this therapeutically to reduce oxidative stress. However, after that, your body has a feedback system by which it compensates for the high CO2 building up the mask and the insufficient O2. And so it increases your breathing rate and it increases your heart rate. And so that puts metabolic stress. And so if you're an older person, that could be very problematic. Young people can probably deal with this amount of metabolic stress. However, this keeps going. And what happens is it affects every feedback system basically in your body as your body tries to balance itself, but it can't balance itself. And the insufficient oxygen starts doing damage. That damage actually causes oxidative stress, causes inflammation, and wreaks metabolic havoc. And so this group here basically are postulating a possible mechanism by which face mask wearing, oops, okay, that's not you guys, I'm assuming. All right. Okay. So by which face mask wearing can cause metabolic stress. Am I still on here? Hello?
Yes,
You're
you are
still
still
on.
on.
Okay.
We can
All right.
hear
I
you.
just wanted to make sure because my phone rang. I thought it might be you guys saying I was cut off, but it's not. It's somebody wanting money for a political campaign. Okay. So they're postulating a possible mechanism by which this is might cause someone to have sudden cardiac death, which has happened in a few cases in China. And so I know you guys have got this. There'll be a test later, right? So the point of showing this isn't so you guys can memorize it and take a test, but so that you can kind of start to see that there's many, many layers of feedback mechanisms. And I just obviously don't think that our governor has any idea of what you're playing with when you're masking people. And so one of the things, like here we have the partial pressure of oxygen. Can you see my cursor there? And the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And, as the partial pressure of oxygen goes down and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide goes up, there's a huge increase in reactive oxidation species. And that has consequences that affect all kinds of systems in the body. So the bottom line is there are many, many feedback mechanisms that are being unnaturally stressed by mask wearing that are resulting in metabolic havoc, resulting in the creation of reactive oxygen species, or ROS. And those are the same things that actually can cause like vaccine injury and cause huge amounts of inflammation. They can also screw up your electrical systems that are mediated by calcium, sodium, and potassium that affect your heart rate and every electrical neural potential that your body sends. And those govern our heartbeats and our nervous system. You screw that up, and who knows what might happen, because the thing is, as we know, if you had a completely healthy, unvaccinated child with no problems whatsoever, it might not be an issue. And, unless, of course, they're trying to run cross country or something, but if they're just sitting there wearing the mask. But many of our kids aren't healthy. They are on the threshold of metabolic disaster already, so much so that a vaccine induces it. This is the same thing. It's going through similar pathways to basically increase inflammation and create metabolic havoc. And so it's just a disaster, and I would never have a child wear a mask. It's just stupid. Okay. All right, so what can we do about the mandates? I think it's really important to try to get those in authority, especially doctors, to go on the record saying it's safe to wear a face mask in a specific situation. Many of us have already pulled our kids out of school, or we've managed to get some sort of waiver because we're not going to do this. But sort of globally, we need to find a way. And I actually, even though my daughter's not wearing a mask, I asked her neurologist to give a statement saying that the face mask would not in any way increase her potential to have seizures because she's epileptic. And surprisingly, they did. Now, because she's not wearing a mask, there's no reason for me probably to sue them because she probably won't be damaged. But if everybody did that, somebody's going to be damaged in one way or another. And we need to let them know that they're going to be held accountable. If we don't ask them to make these statements, then they're not going to feel like they're going to be held accountable. Like when you call the governor's office, they don't want to make those statements. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, we don't know. You should ask your doctor. Well, if you don't know, why are you making the mandate? And so we really have to try to nail them down, because once they've made a statement and they've put it in writing, then we can say, you said this and the data contradict it. We can sue you for malpractice. And so those are the kind of things that we need to do. I'd like to also see some Freedom of Information Acts on the scientific data that they use to make the decisions regarding the mask mandates. And so, you know, also when we were watching the hearings against the Supreme Court, they made the point that if any of these executive orders are unreasonable, that we can sue. And so I think this is absolutely an unreasonable mandate, especially for our children. And so I think, especially now, because we are well past any sort of epidemic status, and so that somebody needs to sue the government about this mask mandate, that it's doing more harm than good, and that there's so little evidence, scientific evidence to support it. Okay, so I'm about to move on to flu shots. I don't know if I should take questions on the mask mandates now or wait till the end. Hello? Anybody there?
I'm here. I don't know if Angela stepped away for a minute, so
Well, I'm here as well. I just have to mute because my kids are going to bed right now. That's all.
You should wait till the end, Christina.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to move away from mask mandates. If you have a question, write it down. I'll take it at the end. And so at the same time now, even though we're wearing masks, which is supposed to protect us from COVID, they're so worried about that we're all going to get the flu. And if we get flu and COVID, it's going to be the end of the world. And so cue the flu shot push. And so now they're coming out with this really bad science. And here's an example. Inactivated trivalent influenza vaccine is associated with lower mortality among COVID-19 patients in Brazil. So many of these papers are not yet peer reviewed and they're just coming out, but you're likely to see them in the media, basically, you know, trying to promote the flu vaccine is going to save us from COVID until we get the wonderful COVID vaccine. And so Karen Feltzer, PhD, recently presented some information on the flu shot and COVID-19 on building bridges in children's health with Tatiana, oh, I can't say her last name unless I see it, but Tatiana O. And so I highly recommend that. I'll talk a little bit more about that on that platform at the end. But basically, she has, and I'll have a link to this site. I have it here. And so this is in the resources that you can look. I have this slide with these two links. So if you click on this link, it will have links to these papers and it will have an analysis that basically shows what's wrong with these specific papers. And so when you see those and you want to answer questions from friends or relatives that say, see, it helps, you can go to this site and kind of analyze why it's bad science, okay? So the site analyzes the flurry of new studies purportedly showing the flu shot reduces COVID illness. I also want to focus, I'm just going to mention that so that you can go to that site if you want. And I'm also going to talk very briefly about the fact that she presented some data showing that countries with widespread flu vaccination showed more severe COVID illness, just not more illness, but that the illness was more deadly. And so I want to take a brief look at that. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I don't want to get too far into it. But again, here's the link right here at the bottom in orange, yellow, whatever color, that you can go to look through this data and find out more about it. Okay, so here's the data. So what they found in this analysis, basically they looked at flu vaccination rates. I think most of the vaccination rates were some of them were gotten from 2018. If you look at the data, she tells you what year they got them from because it varies from year to year. But in any case, they found that if countries had a flu vaccination rate of greater than 49%, the increase, basically the COVID infections were much more severe. So if you look at this graph, basically what we're looking at is the number of COVID deaths going up here, and then across here is the amount of flu vaccination. So basically, if you have low rates of flu vaccination, there's not that many COVID deaths, which means that the disease itself, even though there were plenty of cases of disease, that didn't really vary. It's just that people weren't dying of it. So, and as you get more and more flu vaccinations, when you hit a threshold, and I saw this in many different instances in different countries and in different states, of about, oh, there we are, 49%, basically all of a sudden you see these, like Belgium, UK, US, you see really high rates of death from COVID. So, and this is number per million, deaths per million people. So the question is, what's going on here? So let me just read their little thing. What connects the countries of Belgium, Peru, this is from their analysis, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Chile, Sweden, the US, Mexico, and France? These countries, the top 10 in COVID-19 mortality as of August 24, 2020, according to Johns Hopkins, all injected more than 49% of their elderly populations with the flu vaccine. And I think this was in people over 65 years old. Higher rates of flu vaccination clearly appears to transform large amounts of COVID cases, so people with COVID, to from mild disease to severe disease. So in all cases, many people had COVID, but once your flu vaccination rates in the elderly exceeded 49%, it suddenly became very lethal. So, and this is their analysis. This indicates that when the virus is caught by a chain of individuals who have all received the flu vaccine, it may somehow become more dangerous, perhaps because people are passing on higher viral loads or because the virus changes in some way. So I didn't put the papers up for this, but there's been quite a bit of work done that shows that getting the flu vaccine basically mistrains your immune system. So it's looking in the blood for virus and it's not attacking virus in the lungs. So you're more likely to get non-influenza respiratory infections, and you're more likely to get severe infections, whether they're the flu or another respiratory infections, that actually you're like 4 times more likely to get in the hospital from a respiratory infection if you have the flu shot. And so basically there's something going on where it's allowing a lot of viral replication. And so it's unclear whether these people have so much more viral replication that they're shedding more virus, so they're spreading it more. And then if they spread it to someone else who has the flu shot, then it's sort of a serial kind of a thing. And we know that if you, from studies on the measles, if you're in close quarters with someone where you receive a lot of virus, you're more likely to have a severe case of that particular illness, as opposed to just being transient and picking up a couple of viruses, your body fights it off and you don't get severely ill. So obviously more work needs to be done on this, but this obviously indicates that, this flu shot push, I'm not sure if the virus is still severe enough to go back to a severe COVID infection, or if we've reached herd immunity yet or what, but that the pushing the flu shot, in some cases could be catastrophic or has been catastrophic in terms of promoting severe COVID infection. Okay, so I'm going to end with that. And again, I have those links up there where you can find more data on that. And she wanted this information to be widely disseminated. So I just wanted you guys to know, and you can go to that site and find out more information. So now the rest of the presentation is just going to be going over 3 of the main vaccines, a little bit about how they're made and how they work and what their drawbacks are. So one of the front runners that I think Dr. Fauci is invested in is the Moderna vaccine. It's probably really scary because a lot of the people who are investors or the top scientists have either left the company or they've sold all their stock. So if you had a great vaccine that everybody in the world was going to take, it doesn't seem like you'd be selling your stock. So the Moderna's vaccine is an mRNA vaccine. This is actually a form of gene therapy, and there are several different vaccines in the works that use this new gene therapy, but none of them have come into market. And so we don't know what the drawbacks are, because, you know, if they were so great, how come none of them have made it to market, which indicates that there's probably some pretty serious drawbacks that they have not figured out how to deal with yet. So in this, a viral gene from COVID, probably the spike protein, the RNA encoding the spike protein, is inserted into a plasmid and grown up in E. coli bacteria. The mRNA is created, well, usually actually this first part would be done with the DNA. So then the mRNA is created by incubating this plasmid DNA with RNA polymerase and nucleotides, and we create an mRNA. So this can be a cell-free system at this point. There's bacteria at the E. coli stage, but as we move forward, they can kind of do a lot of this cell-free, which they're trying to get away from all these problems of having the retroviruses and other viruses in the cells that they're growing the vaccines on. So they create this mRNA in a sort of a cell-free system, and then they put it in human cells that used to be breast cancer cells, so HeLa cells. And that's just to validate that when the mRNA gets in, they get it to express this spike protein. They test to see if the spike protein is there, and they know that the mRNA system is working, all right? But then they will take, again, the cell-free RNA, and they're going to put it into small cell-like vesicles and deliver it into cells. So I want to go a little bit further. I'm going to spend the most time on this one because it is such a new technology. All right, so for those of you who may not remember this, basically your gene expression starts in your nucleus. This is a nucleus, this blue area, and you've got your DNA here. And what happens is your DNA is transcribed into mRNA, and mRNA goes to the cytoplasm, where it goes to the ribosome, where it's made into a protein. All right, so what they're going to try to do is skip this whole first step, and they're just going to add some mRNA. It's going to go to your protein, going to go to your ribosomes, and it's going to make a protein, except for it's going to make a viral protein, because you're viruses do hijack your system to make proteins, but we're doing it in a way that perhaps has never been done. And so we really don't know if it's going to react the same way it does when a virus really does it, or when your body really does it, or if there's going to be something that's not quite right that's going to cause, sort of throw a monkey wrench into the system. And we're not really sure about that. All right, so one other really concerning thing is that, okay, let me take a step back. When I went to graduate school 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, gene therapy was all the rage. We were going to be able to fix genes that were mutated and basically save everybody. And so what they did is, again, they put this mRNA inside like cold virus shells, like adenovirus shells or other things. And so they figured that will get it into the cell just like a virus does. And so they tried to give it to people, and they reacted with anaphylactic shock and died. And so they kind of have been trying to figure out a way to get this into cells that does not create an immune response and an inflammation response that makes things worse rather than better. So their latest try is to create these little tiny lipid vesicles. They're sort of like fat vesicles, where they take your fat mixed with ethanol, and they take some of the mRNA and some water, and they mix it with some other things, some phosphatidylcholine, some cholesterol, which is also in your body, some polyethylene glycol, which is not, and this is very reactogenic. And so they mix all of that and make this little lipid vesicle, and that's what they're going to inject into you, and hope that it goes through your cell membranes and delivers this mRNA into the inside of your cells. Okay, and as an aside, the polyethylene glycol they use is very reactogenic and induces an immune response by binding to toll-like receptors. And if you remember Teresa Deischer's work, these can basically signal to the cell, creating an extremely inflammatory response, similar to that which lipopolysaccharide, which is the part of the bacterial cell membrane, like that's in the DTP vaccine, that's in the pertussis vaccine, that caused so much problem. So it could signal a response, just like that LPS or some of those vaccines do that have the bacterial cell membrane in them, and that's why they cause seizures and other things like that. And so it has the potential to be very reactogenic in people, especially if it's not, I don't know, some people may tolerate it better than others, I guess. Okay, so here's how it's supposed to work. They're going to take this small lipid-like vesicle with the RNA in it, and I don't know if this is one where they're going to like electrocute the cells, like send an electric pulse in to get it into the cells, or if it's just supposed to go in on its own. I've heard both. But anyway, it's supposed to bind, go right through the cell membrane, release its RNA, which goes to the ribosome, makes the spike protein, which then is supposed to be bound to different antibodies that end up on the cell surface and signal other immune cells to work. Now, I'm not sure if your body is making this viral protein, why it would necessarily then put it on outside in the cell, but I am not an immunologist, so that would be a better question for an immunologist to ask them. So if it would actually do that or not, if it would actually provide any kind of real immunity. All right, so some potential concerns with the Moderna vaccine, the reactogenicity of the polyethylene glycol and the various lipid components. We may be sensitizing your body to now become allergic to fats, to lipids, which make up every cell membrane in your body, and we eat them. So just such a bad idea. And remember, all of the myelin sheaths, everything that covers your spinal cord and your brain, all of that is made of lipids. All of that is made out of fat. You start attacking that, and you're going to have severe problems. Sort of like Nick Gauthier has when it was demyelinating his spine. So also you could get localized destruction of cells either containing or displaying the viral protein antigen. So in cells that make that protein, your body may see it as foreign and start attacking it and create some sort of abscess or some sort of it would look like an infection or cellulitis or something like that. We could also get antibody-dependent enhancement, and so this is what we have seen in the past with the SARS-CoV-1 and vaccine, is that basically it produced a robust antibody response, but then when the animals were introduced to the actual virus, somehow it primed their immune systems and basically made it easier for the virus to enter and infect the cells, and they got extremely severe disease and many of them died. And so that happened with almost all of the SARS-CoV-1 vaccines that they made. So the question is it happening with these, and are they testing it correctly to make sure it's not, or are they doing sort of a test to get around that and not really looking at it seriously? All right. So another thing that's been brought up is the integration of genetic material into either other viruses that might be present in the cells or the host genome. Generally RNA, it becomes a protein. However, if someone has an active retroviral infection, it could possibly become DNA and either integrate into another virus that's a DNA virus or into the host cell DNA. I would say that this is very rare and unlikely to happen, but if you've got recipients with various retroviral infections, I suppose it's possibly possible. I think more likely you might be getting some recombination with other RNA viruses, which may not be a good thing because we might be making mutated different types of viruses and basically creating new Frankenstein viruses that we don't know what they will be like. All right, and then of course we really don't know. There might be all kinds of unknown reactions because this is a very new technology, and what it does in a cell culture is very different than what it's going to do in a human being. And so who knows what might happen. All right, so these should go a little quicker. The other one is I think this is the one from AstraZeneca, and I think it was developed at the University of Oxford. It's grown in HEC293 cells, which are an aborted fetal cell line. What they did was they took a Chinese cold virus, adenovirus, and combined it with the SARS-CoV-2 virus and took out the part it needs to replicate itself. And so it's replication deficient. And this is the one that's currently in clinical trials. It supposedly induced a Th1 response with neutralizing antibody, which is the kind of response that is probably a good response. But when they injected it into monkeys and challenged them 28 days with the virus, pneumonia was prevented. This is what their data show. They did not see any antibody-dependent enhancement, but it wasn't really done correctly. They didn't test it at the right time points, and so it's hard to know if that data is reliable. And most importantly, the virus replication was prevented in the lungs, which prevented the pneumonia, but not in the nose. And so this would offer personal protection, but not protection from transmission. And so if we're wearing masks to prevent transmission, how would this help? This doesn't prevent transmission. Not that they really care. I believe, but am not sure. I tried to look into it, but sometimes it's hard to find all the data on a particular vaccine all in one place, that this is the one that's from AstraZeneca that just had the transverse myelitis, basically polio. It's in one of the persons who was doing the clinical trials. And so now they're saying, oh, that's the transverse myelitis is not related to the vaccine. Where have we heard that before? So we'll see what happens with that. All right, and then there's one that's being made by the Chinese. It's grown in monkey kidney cells. Interestingly, the Vero cells that they grow a lot of these viruses in, the reason they can grow them in is because they're deficient in something called interferon alpha, which induces your body to produce an antiviral response and destroy viruses. So that makes it a lot easier to grow the virus that you're trying to grow. But a lot of times you may have all kinds of other viruses, because if it's allowing your virus to grow, it can be allowing all sorts of monkey viruses to grow as well. And remember, we got the SV40 virus that causes cancer from monkey kidney cells that the polio vaccine was grown in. All right, so grown in monkey kidney cells. It's an inactive virus with beta-propiolactone, which is a known carcinogen, and it's also adjuvanted with aluminum hydroxide. So I don't think there is a vaccine of this particular type with an RNA virus that uses an inactivated virus with an aluminum adjuvant, but I need to look into that, and I think it's specific for this kind of vaccine. So there's concern that with both the inactivated virus and the aluminum adjuvant, you're going to create a very strong Th2, which is sort of an allergy-producing inflammatory immunopathology when you basically see the virus. Or it may just, create that when you, long-term, it may change the way your immune system deals with things. So they did test for immunopathology, but they may not have used the right time or the right methods. It wasn't very rigorous, and so the question is, can we trust those data? So previous vaccines caused eosinophilic pneumonia, which is basically immunopathology. It's basically COVID-like symptoms in the lungs, and so there are still some serious concerns with this particular vaccine. And again, this is very similar to the inactivated vaccines that Peter Abbey looked at in Africa, where they saw that, girls specifically were 10 times more likely to die if they got vaccinated with DTP than if they did not. And so he also looked at many other, that was actually a bacterial vaccine, but when he looked at many inactivated virus vaccines, he saw the same thing. He saw this movement towards a Th2 type response, and basically that the children were more likely to die of all causes if they had been vaccinated with these type of vaccines, as opposed to, say, a live viral vaccine. Okay, so summary of these three vaccines and their risk. The Moderna one, I think there's a risk of anaphylactic reaction and unknown local and systemic reactions due to new technology and a new delivery system. Again, this is gene therapy. The Oxford, I believe that's the AstraZeneca one, but we need to confirm that, uses aborted fetal cells it may not prevent transmission, and you still cannot rule out antibody-dependent enhancement. The Chinese vaccine is an inactive viral vaccine. It's an inactivated virus. It induces a Th2 response that's associated with antibody-dependent enhancement, also associated with a very strong inflammatory response, and is the type that causes, higher deaths in people with the vaccine. And then it's grown in monkey kidney cells that lack interferon alpha, which means there may be other viruses present in it, and it's adjuvanted with aluminum. Okay, and lastly, I'd like to thank Tatiana Bokanic and Building Bridges in Children's Health, BCH, as much of this information was presented in that forum. And if you're not familiar with it, basically she has a class on immunity fundamentals. It's great. And they have monthly Zoom meetings where they discuss topics like we've just gone through today. It's for people maybe that are comfortable addressing the science and looking at the science, and everybody's welcome to put in their 2 cents. Usually she gives the presentations, but sometimes she does have guest speakers, as in the case of the data on the 49% flu vaccination. And so it's $100 a month, and you get access to the slideshows and links for all the previous slideshows, and then obviously invitations to the monthly Zoom meetings. Okay, so I'm done. If anyone has questions.
There are some questions. Dr. Parks, thank you so much for that information. I'm just going to start off with some of the questions for you. One question, and these may be related to the earlier slides about the mask, but is this metabolic stress caused by all masks or just the N95?
I would say it's caused by all